Another blood-red sunset and yet another moon face, and still another 100 miles to my next resting place. Driving down the road, eyes on the horizon. Within my car, I'm all alone, but feeling good and feeling strong, knowing that this path I'm on brings me to myself. I'm driving.
Hey now all, this is the Spirit Doctor, Kelle Sparta, and you are listening to Spirit Sherpa, the show that helps and encourages you on your journey to unlock your magic mojo. Today I'm joined by Pastor G from TikTok, Reverend Grant Merrill. Grant was a fundamentalist evangelical pastor before undergoing the transformation of a lifetime. With degrees from Indiana Wesleyan University and Ashbury Theological Seminary, his deconstruction journey led him into a wide open faith. As a gay ordained United Methodist pastor, Grant is passionate about bringing change to the world by encouraging others to be their authentic selves. And I have been a follower of his on TikTok for ages now, which in TikTok terms is like, 8 months, maybe a year. I don't know. As long as I've been on TikTok, you were one of the first people that I found. So I had to invite him when we were going to do this 7 Deadly Sins series. I was like, oh my God, I need to talk to Pastor G and I need to get his take on this. So I was so glad you said yes. So welcome.
Thanks. I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me. And I'm a great follower of yours as well. I'm just thrilled to be a part of the podcast.
Fantastic. So now that the Mutual Admiration Society is good. So we're starting a new series today. And, I do series on the podcast periodically. I sort of painted myself into the corner with like 4 different series last year. I'm not going to do that many this year because holy crap, I had no room for anything. But we're doing this series. It's going to be a series of 7, go figure, 7 Deadly Sins, 7 episodes. And I specifically wanted to start today with pride because that one is the one that I've seen the most use out of in the work that I do. Let's just sort of talk about the 7 deadly sins in general. And I'm going to say I didn't do any research on this because I was relying on you. So I'm hoping that you have a clue.
I did. No, we're good.
So can you sort of give us an overview of the 7 deadly sins and why they're important and things like that?
Don't ask me to list all 7. I probably could get all 7 in this moment. But so the 7 deadly sins are really a piece of Christian tradition. The themes of the 7 deadly sins are located in Scripture. You can see them throughout. However, there's not a list of 7 in one place anywhere in the Christian or Jewish Bibles. The 7 deadly sins were kind of codified in the 4th century by the desert mothers and fathers. They were ancient Christian mystics that kind of ran away from Roman society to live out in the desert and live really kind of radical, mysterious. They really delved into the supernatural and spiritual nature of their Jewish and Christian heritages. And so the person who first wrote down the 7 deadly sins in that form in the Christian tradition is a guy who we're going to test my pronunciations today. Evagrius Ponticus, I believe is how his name is pronounced. However, the theme of 7 deadly sins or 7 virtues is actually an ancient Roman thing. So in ancient Roman society, there were 7 virtues, 7 things that they valued. And so the desert fathers and desert mothers both had 7 virtues and 7 sins that coordinate with each other. And so we're talking about pride today, and that coordinating virtue is humility. This is a pre-Christian tradition that, like everything in the church, was adopted by the church and kind of adulterated to our own purposes. And so the 7 deadly sins was not a Christian tradition. It was a Roman thing that we kind of brought in and merged into our theology and practice.
Great. So this is where we get the meek shall inherit the earth, and the humility and the pride piece. And so this is interesting because I did not know that they came from Roman background. So I've learned something today. I feel edified. Thank you for that. when you talk about pride, and if the corresponding virtue is humility, and I want to say that those are not necessarily opposites. And in fact, in spiritual practice, they are really not opposites. And so we're going to talk about that today. But, the reason I picked this one for the first one is because for my people on this podcast, the people who listen, we had parents who were like, you can't feel good about yourself, right? Or a community that said you can't feel good about yourself, or, a country that said you can't feel good about yourself, especially if you're a person of color listening to this in the US. Holy crap. Right. Okay. So, the whole pride thing gets built into that. And it's like, well, pride is bad because you're bigger, you're big for your britches. Right. And the humility thing gets used as a way to beat you into submission and tell you to do what you're told and shut up. Right. And so I wanted to deconstruct this, because from a spiritual perspective, it's a very different thing, right? So I'm going to let you talk first about what your piece is, and then I'll bring mine in, because otherwise I'll just talk.
And I will say, I have a very different perspective than many Christians would have on pride. And part of that is from, I grew up in an extremely conservative fundamentalist tradition, and I pastored in that tradition for 8 years. And I would say that to some extent, to the opposite end, just as you said, in the spiritual realm, pride and humility really are not opposite virtues. Humility, I think, it becomes a substitute for pride. In the more conservative, the more right you go in Christianity, the more that humility becomes a source of pride, and really perhaps is even more dangerous than pride itself. I mean. And so, there's a saying that pride is the root of all evil. And so in some respects, pride is a perfect place to start in this list, because within traditional or Orthodox Christian theology, pride really is the root of everything that we would consider the antithesis of the kind of life that we would want to live or should live. And really that goes back to the creation narratives, which, for the record, I don't I consider them poetry. I don't believe the creation narratives to be history in any form. But within Christian orthodoxy, we believe that the original sin of humanity is to want to be God. That Eve wasn't just disobeying, that Adam and Eve, when they ate that apple, they weren't just disobeying, they were wanting to be God. The serpent said to them, God doesn't want you to know this. That's why they wanted to eat, because they wanted to have the knowledge of good and evil. And so pride becomes the root within Orthodox Christian theology of everything that we don't want to be. Now, that being said, as I have grown as a person, and in my faith tradition in the United Methodist Church, along with most Christian traditions, actually, we don't believe in original sin. We believe in original goodness, that we are born divine and good, and that we contain the image and presence of God or the divine, but that we choose to do bad. The 7 deadly sins, and pride especially, come into practice when we start this journey down a road that tries to smash us and force us to see ourselves as less than divine. And so I have a more favorable image of pride, not in a way that when pride causes damage between neighbors, and when pride causes harm to the environment around us, that is deadly sin. That is deadly damage that is done. But pride, unfortunately, has come to mean so many things that it was never intended to mean within Christian community.
The piece that keeps showing up for me around pride in the spiritual work that I do for myself and with my clients, my students, is the pride that creates identity. And so there's this way in which the things that we take pride in, they become our identity, and therefore they become a limiting belief. Everything, every way in which we identify ourselves is actually a limiting belief, because it means that we are less than everything and all that is, right? And so all of our self-definitions are in fact limiting beliefs. But the most insidious are the ones of pride, because we feel good about them, and we enthusiastically invest in them, right? And so, I recently, one of the stories that I told years ago in the podcast was that I used to define myself and take pride in the fact that I was the most understanding person you'll ever meet. And I used to say that. And the problem is that drew to me all these experiences that people would have for me to have to be understanding, and which meant that people treated me badly because I needed to reinforce my belief that I was understanding. And the only way for me to do that is for me to have things that I needed to be understanding of show up in my life, right? And this is why I always encourage people, never define yourself as a survivor, because you will only manifest things to you that will cause you to have reasons to survive something else. Don't define yourself as a survivor, this just happened with one of my students recently as well. And she was defining herself by this old belief structure. And I was like, hello, and it's like, oh, yes. I used to take great pride in that. She used to take great pride in being able to make her way through situations and through life in dire circumstances and have no one know that was the case. And I'm like, how about you let go of that one? Because we don't want to be manifesting those dire circumstances, right? Yeah. So, these are the sins, quote unquote, sins of pride in the spiritual world when we look at it from that perspective, because that's what creates our limiting belief structures. It's very interesting. They call them deadly sins. Do we know why they call them deadly sins?
Yes. So each of the 7 sins that are listed, and there were originally 8, they were in Greek originally, and so the other didn't translate, and so they got lumped into 7 together. They are listed as deadly sins because each of these are seen as the root sins for everything under the sun. And so while I flippantly say pride is the root of all evil, the reality is that, when we look at greed and lust and avarice and, all of these, we really can start to, one of my favorite things, I've been in therapy for years. I love my therapist. Shout out to my therapist. The feelings wheel, where you've got, I don't know if you've ever seen, you have 5 or 6 emotions in the center of the wheel. And then as it expands out, there are many more blocks. And, you can see where I may be saying, I'm feeling angry. Okay, well, that's great. Anger is a good emotion. However, let's fan that out and let's see what my actual emotion is. And so in some respects, these 7 sins, deadly sins, are kind of the center of this wheel. And then as you start to expand out, we see the whole of humanity and the way that we create death and destruction among us, whether that be physical death and destruction or emotional or whatever that is, kind of condense into these seven things. And so that's why they're called the 7 deadly sins. Now, to the average, that is what it should be. To the average Christian, to the average clergy person, to the medieval church, they were called the 7 deadly sins. And used in a sense that was a threat. They were used to threaten people that don't you dare do this because you will die. You will burn.
Go to hell.
You will, yes, all the things. And so that was the root of it. The Christian mystics, the desert mothers and fathers, who are just fascinating individuals within Christian history, never intended for these to be threatening list. They were intended to be ways for us to view ourselves in light of the world that we create around us.
Yeah. Well, and pride comes into play in another way as well. It is the place in which we find ourselves to be special, right? Oh, I'm special, and therefore I'm better than. That is one of the seductive undertones of pride is that sense of superiority that can come along with it, right? And anytime you're feeling like you're special or you're better than, you're actually feeling like you're less than. And you're compensating for feeling less than by projecting a sense of being special or better than. There's that little niggly bit underneath there. And then there's also the righteous pride, right? And we have talked about righteousness on this podcast a lot, but you cannot be righteous without feeling victimized first. And so righteousness comes from victimization, which the righteous pride, therefore, is a rebellion against the sense of victimization and a projection of that victimization through hatred onto someone else. And so when we look at that special or better than, when we look at that righteous pride, that's where the deadly sin piece comes in, right? And so, that's really where pride gets in the way, right? And so if we look at the other side, the humility side, and I'm so glad you brought these virtues in because this is going to have a whole nother layer to the conversation. I knew you were the right person to invite on the show. Thank you so much. So when we look at humility, what's your take on the humility piece?
I think humility is given what's the word I want? A good rep. Like I would normally say that's given a bad reputation. Humility is given a good reputation. I think that in general, we think that it's a good thing for us to think poorly of ourselves, and that's not limited to Christianity, though we are the masters of thinking. At least thinking that we think poorly of ourselves. I'll put it that way, saying that we think poorly of ourselves, when in reality, I think humility in and of itself is the source of so much pride within the Christian arena. We want to believe that we're humble, but in reality, we're very rarely a humble group of people. And in fact, I would say, I was thinking just a moment ago, you were talking about pride and special and all these things. Mr. Rogers is my favorite of the, modern saints in the world. I love.
I have this secret belief that's not really so secret here, but I have this secret belief that Fred Rogers was the second coming of Christ.
Oh, I love Fred Rogers. He is every bit the person that I want to be in my life. But even as wonderful as Fred Rogers was, he garnered so much hate because he dared to call everyone special. It wasn't that I'm special or that he's special. And he was, of course, an ordained Presbyterian pastor. And he and I, though we are in different faith traditions, have very much the same theological tradition in that original goodness, not original sin. But he garnered hate because people said, what if everyone believed they were special? Well, that's garbage. People will feel entitled. Well, I think that's the difference. Pride is dangerous. Pride is, I am divine. I am special. While pride in the sense that I think it should be taken is we are all divine beings. And it's not, in the sense that humility would make us think that we're worms, we're garbage, we're nothing good. Pride in the positive sense says we are carriers of divine light and life, all of us, and that life is an opportunity to embrace that and discover that while recognizing that that's in everyone, not just me. Pride, the deadly sin, says I am divine and special. So humility, I think, gets a good reputation when it shouldn't in general.
Yeah, it's very interesting because when you said humility makes us feel bad about ourselves, I was like, you know what? I've never actually looked up the word humility. And I believe that it is what you say it is in the general vernacular, but I wonder what the definition actually is. I'm terrible about this. My husband got really upset at me the other day because, I said something and he said, well, that sounded arrogant. And I said, it's only arrogant if it's not true. And because that's the definition of arrogance, right? It says puffing, right? And he's like, no, it's not true. And I looked it up and that's what it was. And he's like, I hate this conversation. I was like, right.
Dictionary.com.
Right. And so I just looked up humility while you were talking, and it says a modest or low view of one's own importance, humbleness. And the idea is, and we see this, it's even in modern day mythology in terms of like Indiana Jones, only a humble man may pass, down on his knees, right? Hands and knees. And so this idea that to be humbled is to be brought to your knees. And, I think that is also a misnomer, right? From a spiritual perspective, right? It's not about being humbled on your knees in reverence to everything else. It's about being equal to everyone else, and acknowledging that we are all divine beings and that we are all part of the all that is. We are all, in the Christian vernacular, the children of God, right? And, it's one of those things where I love Christ. Christ was a great master and a great teacher. And my experience of the Christian church has been that the church has entirely missed the point in most cases. And I'm like, how can you preach this stuff and still not see it? It's there in black and white. It's not like it's subtle in any way. Love everyone, right? Judge not. These are simple concepts, and yet somehow missed by a lot of the churches that I have attended in my life, which are many and varied. And so when we talk humility from a spiritual perspective, and this comes up a lot for me actually, because I get shit all the time from shamans who say you're not supposed to say you're a shaman, and I'm like, look, I get that in a tribal culture where everyone knows what a shaman is and who the shaman is, that the only reason to say that you're a shaman is out of hubris and pride. I do not live in a tribal culture where everyone knows what a shaman is, much less who a shaman is or what they should go to the shaman for. Therefore, I am required to say I'm a shaman, to define it on a regular basis and to explain what it is that I do, because otherwise no one would know, right? That is not hubris and pride. That is being of service. And so, this is the difference, right? It's not, hubris and pride are situational in some cases in this scenario, right? If I were to walk into a tribe and the shaman were to acknowledge me, I would never say I was a shaman ever again, right? Because I wouldn't need to, right? But here, I have to say it, right? So, what defines hubris is, are you puffing? Are you being arrogant, right? Right. And what defines humility is, are you treating yourself as equal to others, right? Not better than, not worse than, right? That's important too. You are not being humble if you're making yourself less than your fellow man or woman or non-binary, right? You are not making yourself better. That's actually a form of hubris. Making yourself less than other people is a form of hubris. So I can be less than so I can be better than, right? Or it's manipulation. I can be less than so that I can manipulate you into not hurting me. So it's either hubris in hiding, or it is manipulation for personal safety. But if you're truly going to walk that middle path, which is really what we shoot for, humility is about being equal and about being inclusive and about being, connected one to another, right? And so, these are the things that we think about. And this is why I wanted to have these conversations. Yes. I'm sorry. I'm channeling William Shatner for some reason.
But I think you really hit the nail on the head. Within the Christian tradition, we love to quote, "The last shall be first," and we say it jokingly, well, don't get in line. We're at potlucks and get in line. The last shall be first, so I'll hop in last. We say that jokingly, but in reality, that is the spirit that we live in. So often is we have this humility because we know that in the end, that humility really makes us more important, which is the antithesis of humility in the end. I mean, we say that jokingly. And so I love the way you described it. And so I want to relate it back to, within the Christian tradition, St. Francis. Francis was, we love to make Francis a progressive person now. And in lots of ways, he is wildly progressive. However, conservative Christians and progressive Christians all claim Francis. And so I won't claim to say that he was some intensely leftist. However, the way that he viewed creation and us being a part of everything that is, and the way that he personified, my favorite hymn is, one of my favorite hymns is All Creatures of Our God and King, which came from his writing or his poem, The Canticle of the Sun. And he names Mother Earth and Sister Wind and brother Sun and Sister Moon. And, there's a lovely legend of him talking to a fox that was terrifying this neighborhood. And he put himself in the universe as a piece, and he knew his place as a part of this environment that he lived in, as a part of the world, as a part of nature, and as a part of his community of other fellow human beings. And that is true humility. Not that he was less than, but that he recognized his place. And he didn't strive for another place, whether that be a place that's less or a place that's more. I think true humility is recognizing our place in the universe, in creation, not just in our circle of society. And so it expands.
And that actually, it's very interesting, because that flashes me back to my when I was just starting on my walkabout, and I was getting my tattoo as my dedication to Grandmother Spider. When I went into my vision when I was getting that tattoo, she showed me this huge web inside of a well. And, I was in tears because she had sent somebody to support me during the process of getting the tattoo. And it had been the perfect person, somebody who weaved and then, spun her own thread, weaved her own cloth. And I mean, just the whole 9 yards. Right. And I was just like, I was just in tears. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for deeming me worthy. And she knocked me across the room and was like, what are you talking about, worthy? Come over here. And she showed me this web, and she said, you see that thread, that one strand that's fraying? And I said, yes. She said, I shore it up because it needs shoring up, not because it's worthy, but because it's part of the whole, and you take care of the entire web, right? And everything is interconnected. And I never want to hear the word worthy come out of your mouth ever again, because that's not what it's about, right? And I was like, oh, okay, I get it, right? My guides are a little bit more aggressive, or they used to be. That's what happens when you take the name Sparta, right? But it reminded me of that. It's that knowing your place. It's like, oh, that's my strand right there. I see that strand. That's my strand, and I needed shoring up today. So I got somebody to shore me up. Okay, great. But these are the things that we think, in our hubris, we think that we need to be more important, more, whatever. And I see this a lot in people coming into their awareness and spiritual awakenings and stuff, where they're like, I have a mission to save the world in some way, or to up-level the planet, or whatever, right? And you might. Don't get me wrong. That might be your place. But your place could also just be to do this piece over here, and you're one piece in a huge machine of people who are bringing the planet to another level of consciousness. And so, one of the biggest things I see is that they get freaked out by the fact that it's such a big task, and they think they have to do it all by themselves. And it's like, look, yes, this is your mission, but you don't have to do it all by yourself. I know your life has been about doing things all by yourself and not getting any help, and the help you get sucks. I get it. That was my life too for a long time. And it doesn't have to be like that. Right? So sometimes we just do our piece, and then other people do their piece, and other people do their piece, and the whole cog of the machine just moves everything up. And we're experiencing that now. And that's why there's such pushback, right? It's because it's actually up leveling. And so the powers that be are pushing back because, yeah, we can't have that, right? Yeah. And they wouldn't be pushing back if it wasn't working, right? So, these are the things that we have to keep in mind as we're going through this. And this has been such a wide-ranging conversation. Well, then, I think this is a good place to put a pin in this conversation, and we'll be back for the rest of the 7 deadly sins and the 7 virtues now that we're going to balance them with. So I'll have to change the title of the episode. I love that. So, okay. So at the end of these episodes, Joey, who was my podcast host here up until recently, used to ask me for a Kelleism, which was a little way to wrap up the episode with just a single thought. So I didn't warn you about this, so I'm talking a lot right now so that you'll have an opportunity to think about it. But I'm going to ask you to do that final wrap up thought at the end, the little, put a pin in it moment for everything we've discussed here.
I love the image of true humility is knowing our place. And that while pride inherently isn't bad and humility inherently isn't bad, really everything in life is about what we do with it. And so I think that pride and humility at the root is knowing our place and knowing the place of all around us. And so I'm coming back to knowing that we are a part of the divine that is everything, the divine that is you, Kelle, and the divine that is my neighbor that ticks me off, and the divine that is the cashier that will check me out when I go to the grocery. I'm a part of the divine that is everything, and that it is not prideful or humble for me to make myself less or more than exactly where I am in this moment, and in that interconnected web that I am just a thread in. That is what we are intended to be, and the sin and harm is when we make ourselves more or less than those around us.
So I would add one little piece to this, which because knowing our place has a connotation for me that is like just tweaks up at me. So I'm going to say knowing the place that we belong, knowing where we belong in the world, right? Knowing where we can plug in, where we are welcomed, where we are connected, and where we are at our most engaged and involved in life, where we flourish, right? And so because I want to be, I can't help myself. We were supposed to be closing, but I can't help myself. I want to be clear that this isn't about settling. It's not about settling, right? It's about optimizing your experience everywhere you are, right? It's about finding the best way to be where you are in the moment, because you can't be anywhere else, right? You are where you are right now. You could be somewhere else in a moment or, in a year or a day or whatever, but right now you're right here. And so for right now, what is your optimal way to engage and to be in this space and to be connected in this space and to be comfortable in your own skin in this space, right? That's
and I would say because of our society, you use the word settling. I would say that we almost never would have to settle because naturally our society wants to push us down. Naturally, organized religion wants to push us down. And so we will always need to rise to who we are to be. Now I'll shut up.
Rise. There we go. We'll end on that one. Awesome. Well, this was a great conversation, Grant. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
So, if you want to get hold of Grant, you can find him on TikTok. He is at pastor_G. And I highly recommend you follow him. He is amazing on there. And as always, if you want to follow up on what we're doing, by the way, guys, this episode is going to be the first one that's going to actually be cross-posted to YouTube, a full episode. And so if you want to see what we look like as we had this conversation, you'll get to do that if you want to hang out over on my YouTube channel. Just search for Kelle Sparta on YouTube and you'll find me. As always, like, rate, subscribe. You know how this goes. I don't have to tell you guys, Okay. And we will see you next time. And so that's all we have for this week. Tune in next time when I share another episode on energy, magic, and the spirit world. I'm Kelle Sparta here with Pastor G from TikTok, Grant Merrill, and you have been listening to Spirit Sherpa. So long, everyone.
Driving down the road, eyes on the horizon. Within my car, I'm all alone, but feeling good and feeling strong, knowing that this path I'm on brings me to myself. I'm driving